Facebook for life. You can follow Casey on X, on Truth Social,
still not working.
Rumble, and
we can hear me now.
BTmedia.news. You're listening to Casey Hendrickson
Hold on, folks.
and the Burning Truth. 95.3 MNC.
Can you hear me now? Okay. So,
We'll manually technical difficulties. No idea what's going on with the board, but we'll go through this segment and then we'll see what happens.
Gremlins. That's all I got is Gremlins. Imagine the ancient aliens guy with the big hair and all that stuff. Gremlins. That's what we got. I don't know. I do apologize about that. All right. Well, the census data is not real good for the Biden-Harris administration. This is interesting. One of the seminal moments of the debates came in a 1980 tussle between Republican challenger and the Democrat incumbent. Challenging Jimmy Carter's record as part of his closing statement, Ronald Reagan asked, "Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? It is easier for you to go and buy things. Is it easier for you to go and buy things in the stores than it was 4 years ago?" Last Tuesday, in the very first question of her first presidential debate, Kamala Harris was asked that very thing. Are Americans better off than they were 4 years ago? And did not give a direct answer. But earlier in the day on Tuesday, the Census Bureau provided the answer for her. And the answer is no, they are not. Now, of course, leading into this, the Democrats tried to say, well, pandemic was happening 4 years ago. Yeah, we're better. But really, honestly, fiscally, you're not better. The annual census reports on poverty, income, and health insurance coverage show how Americans' progress has stagnated over the past 4 years. Now, this is, of course, because of Bidenomics, but it is important before we continue on this that you understand that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and Democrats have been telling you that you get paid so much more now than you used to get paid, that the increase in cost of everything, by the way, gas will go up over 40 cents tomorrow, that you can afford all of it. So, yeah, things are more expensive, but you get paid more than they went up. Therefore, you're fine. Joe Biden actually made that case in an interview before he had to step aside as the nominee. It explains why families consider the economy and the nation to be in such poor shape, a problem that Harris's policies would only make worse. On a superficial level, the census income numbers do provide some good news. In 2023, real median household income, that is, the income of the family at the absolute middle, the 50th percentile of the income distribution, as adjusted for inflation, had its first statistically significant income increase in 4 years. But you dig deeper into the census data table, specifically Table A2 of the income report, and the problem becomes clearer. Inflation-adjusted household income in 2023 remained marginally below the 2019 pre-pandemic levels. That means Americans have missed out on 4 years of pay raises to the tune of thousands of dollars. So if you start looking at the tables, the income report for 2019 was $81,210. Okay, it drops in the pandemic, every year of the pandemic. 2023, remember in 2019 it was $81,210. In 2023, it was $80,610. That is $600 less than in 2019. So when you adjust for inflation, you actually are making less money now than you were in 2019. Now, this should not be a surprise to anybody. This doesn't factor in all of those big costs that we always talk about, where you have the 5-digit swing in income that you actually need. Was it $13,000 or $14,000 more to live the same as you were living in 2019? The census data shows that that Americans lost a total of $7,870 in household income over the last 4 years compared to what they would have had if household income had remained at 2019 levels for that entire period. Of course, if incomes had continued to rise, as they had during most of the 4 years prior to 2019, Americans would have benefited even more. The same math applies to the average, as opposed to median household income. It, too, has not yet exceeded 2019 levels when adjusted for inflation. And because average household income is higher than median household income, because millionaires and others in the top 1% skew that average, it demonstrates that even relatively affluent households have suffered from economic stagnation under Bidenomics. The same loss of purchasing power since 2019 appeared in last year's census income report as well, such that few policymakers should be surprised that American families remain in a potentially foul mood after years of struggling to tread water. The real surprise is why Harris thinks that more of the same policies from the past 4 years, more taxes, more government spending, and more regulation will have anything other than the same result. Now, something else they did show, though, over the past several years is that there has become an increasing reliance and dependence on government assistance. So your wages are at best stagnant from 2019 when you adjust for inflation, at worst lower on average, okay? And your dependence on the government has increased for assistance. That's according to the Census Bureau, not some right-wing think tank or anything like that. That is the federal government's own data. Now, when we start talking about stress levels and things like that because of the economy, that'll be the next data set that we talk about. It all kind of goes together. Got more coming up. You're tuned in to The Burning Truth. I think we killed the gremlin. I hope we killed the gremlin. Knocking on wood. A whopping 41% of Americans are at peak stress levels. No, that's weird. How can you be at peak stress levels, Morgan, if you're in the best economy ever? Shouldn't things be just like humdinging along? In a year marked by financial worries and political tension, a new survey has uncovered the staggering impact of stress on everyday Americans. The average person feels their head is spinning from stress a whopping 156 times per year. That translates to about 3 times a week. This alarming statistic is just one of many eye-opening findings from a recent study conducted by Talker Research for Traditional Medicines. Medicinals. In the survey, which polled 2,000 adults, it also found that 41% of respondents are currently experiencing their peak stress level for the year. Americans are also reportedly experiencing brain fog up to 3 times per week, the same number of times that they find their heads spinning. And again, this is all induced by stress. Well, Americans also noted various signs that they reveal they're stressed, including trouble sleeping, 42%, irritability, 37%, fatigue, 34%, headaches, 33%, and feeling worried or paranoid, 31%. Well, that's a lot of stress for, several years in the best economy ever. I don't know why you're so stressed, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know what the deal is with all of you. Ran into this. This is kind of interesting. What happens after Biden's economic manipulations disappear? And there have been manipulations. We talked about them over the years. Biden's steady sale of U.S. strategic oil reserves in order to drive down energy and gas prices. And again, gas will probably go up 40 cents or more tomorrow, if it hasn't already gone up from earlier today, thereby artificially reducing CPI. By June of this year, Biden has sold off at least 50% of the nation's emergency oil supply just to keep CPI down a few points. Keep in mind, bringing down the CPI does nothing to cut the real inflation rate that is already accumulated in necessities, 30 to 50% higher prices, depending on the product or the service. Then there's the manipulation of BLS unemployment data to show millions of new jobs that don't actually exist. After it was announced that Biden was no longer the Democratic candidate, suddenly the U.S. payroll had been revised down by over 818,000, likely with more revisions to come, meaning Bidenomics was being fluffed with fake job creation. I would also like to point out that 818,000 job number, that was the second time we had a revision that showed numbers that large. There was a previous one. So we're about 2 million jobs or so less than they had actually claimed to have created. An even greater concern is the fact that all new jobs created for the past several years have been going to illegal aliens, not legal citizens. In fact, since October of 2019, native-born U.S. workers have lost over 1.4 million jobs. Over the same period, migrants illegally residing in the United States have gained 3 million jobs. The new narrative among leftists is that this is a good thing. They claim that the U.S. needs illegal immigration and open borders in order to support the jobs market and to bring down inflation. Now, leftists listening to that will go, they're not illegal, they're allowed to be here. So we'll just say migrants. You know, what happens when all of that stuff and all of the additional things in the article, what happens when it all goes away and you can't actually do anything with it? My assumption is if a Republican wins the nomination, or I should say wins the presidency, the Republican gets rid of all of that stuff and suddenly it looks really bad for the Republican right out of the gate, right? It's a pretty good question because that manipulation has to end at some point. You can't continue to artificially mess with CPI indefinitely. They got more coming up. You're tuned in to The Burning Truth.
The Burning Truth with Casey Hendrickson.
And good afternoon. Thank you for tuning in to The Burning Truth. I am your host, Casey Hendrickson. I do want to thank R&B Car Company, locations in South Bend, Warsaw, and Fort Wayne. RB Car Company are your used car experts. Hey, the group that's fired like 8,000 rockets at Israel since October of last year says the Israeli state blowing up pagers was a declaration of war, Morgan. How dare Israel start things? Oh, my gosh. What a time to be alive, honestly. Yeah, this type of stuff used to, I mean, the fact that it still flies now is really sad. It used to fly. It shouldn't fly anymore, but unfortunately, it still does fly, and that doesn't make any sense, but you know, now we're at a point where people don't have an excuse to be that ignorant. They just are because they want to be. I got to talk about the RFK Jr. whale story. And this is an old story that is being made new again. I didn't care about it during the campaign. It wasn't a big deal. I didn't really care about the brain thing, the worm, and all of that stuff. I know a lot of people were making a big deal out of it. That wasn't all that important to me. But I think that we do have to talk about the whale chainsaw story. So way back in the day, I think it was like 1994, apparently RFK Jr. Used a chainsaw on a whale, okay? And this has been written about. He's done interviews about it. This has been well known for a long time. This isn't anything that is new. Nobody actually really cared about it until recently. So here's the gist. The whale incident is actually pretty well known. It happened way back in 1994, and there was even a Town and Country feature about it in 2012, where his daughter recounted what happened. When she was 6, word got out that a dead whale had washed up on Squaw Island in Hyannis Port. Bobby, who likes to study animal skulls and skeletons, ran down to the beach with a chainsaw, cut off the whale's head, and then bungee corded it to the roof of the family minivan for the 5-hour haul back to Mount Kisco, New York. Every time we accelerate on the highway, whale juice would pour into the windows of the car, and it was the rankest thing on the planet, Kick recalls. We all had plastic bags over our heads with mouth holes cut out. and people on the highway were giving us the finger, but that was just a normal day-to-day occurrence for us. Okay. Now, again, it's kind of gross, things like that, but it is what it is. Been around since the 1990s. The stuff has been documented for some time. Nobody's ever really cared, and it is what it is. Guy runs for president, and suddenly it's a big deal again. It showed up, didn't get too much attention. Some people made fun of the story. Some people used it against him, that sort of thing. But now, here's what's interesting about this. RFK Jr. now says that he's being investigated for collecting that whale specimen. So it happened in 1994. It was written about in 2012. And nobody cared when he was a Democrat. Nobody even cared when he ran for president as an independent. But now that he's dropped out and he's endorsed Donald Trump, suddenly he's under investigation for something that happened in 1994. Now, I don't know what the statute of limitations are for chopping off the head of a dead whale. I don't know what that is, but I do know that there are a lot of crimes that would have a statute of limitations that runs out way before 2024 for something that happened in 1994. Catch my drift? And we are talking about a 30-year gap here. Former independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. said on Saturday that he's being investigated for collecting a whale specimen. I received a letter from the National Marine Fisheries Institute saying that they were investigating me for collecting a whale specimen 20 years ago. Kennedy said that during a campaign event for Donald Trump in Glendale, Arizona, noting that he received the letter this week. He said that he responded in a letter baselessly linking the National Marine Fisheries Service with whale deaths and calling for the agency to investigate. This is all about the weaponization of our government against political opponents, he said. He did not go into details about the whale incident, but his daughter had previously described the situation involving a whale that took place 30 years ago, which, of course, we described for everybody. So his comments about being, under investigation came during a campaign event in which Tulsi Gabbard was there. Christian University was, this is at Arizona Christian University. He told NBC News after the program that he has never killed a whale. The National Marine Fisheries Service, which is part of the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, did not respond to a request for comment from NBC News. When asked by a reporter after the campaign event for details about the investigation, he said that he was not going to talk about the incident, but would talk about serious policy issues. Yeah, I mean, he said, I'm not interested in feeding that feature of mainstream media. Why should he be? Like I said, there's a lot of things out there where, if you wait 30 years, your statute of limitations is done. But what other reason could there possibly be for investigating this? 30 years ago, he allegedly cut the head off of a dead whale. 30 years ago. Nobody cared. Nobody investigated. Plenty of time to investigate. Story's well known. Been around for a long time. People have talked about it for an extended number of time. Never an issue until he dropped out and endorsed Donald Trump. Now, I suppose I could just ask you to take a step back and think about what that truly means. I think he accurately pointed it out. This is the weaponization of the government. Something that nobody cared about for 30 years is suddenly a priority to be investigated. Must be investigated right now only because he dropped out of the race, not because he was running, only because he dropped out and because he endorsed Donald Trump. So because he is now in Trump's inner circle, he must be investigated, he must be demonized, and the book must be thrown at him as much as possible. Now, what will actually come from this, I don't really know, if anything at all. But it sure is quite a coincidence, don't you think? After all this time? Is there some other angle that I'm missing from this? I mean, there's no new evidence that's come out. Even if you didn't know about it from 1994 to 2012, you knew about it in 2012. It's come up as he was possibly going to be a candidate. Then he was a candidate, came up again. Nobody took it seriously. All of a sudden, it's a big deal. And the only moment it became a big deal was because he threw his support behind Donald Trump. The entire government apparatus has now been weaponized against Donald Trump. Project 2025, which has nothing to do with Trump, one of the good things about Project 2025, though, you talk about the policy positions and the restructuring of federal bureaucracies and things like that, and that's all good to talk about. I think the best feature of Project 2025 is figuring out who in the federal government is friendly or an ally or at least somebody that the right can work with, and who in government is a leftist and will be a liability to you going forward. Because any Republican president, whether it's Trump or anybody else in the future who has that list, is going to be a heck of a lot more productive in what they're able to accomplish as president of the United States. You got more coming up. You're tuned in to The Burning Truth. You ever just scroll through your show prep and realize that you've just been forgetting to cover days of stories? Just going through it, I'm like, that's old now. Can't cover that. That's crazy. Should have covered that. I just keep running out of stuff. Like, just completely running out of it. Okay. Well, I guess we're not going to cover some of this stuff anymore. That's what happened. The news cycle has been just crazy as of late. Just absolutely insane. I never did get to that Ford story, though, did I, Morgan? I never covered that Ford story. Okay, let's do that, because that one's important. And that one's going to be a fight for the future. So Ford, they filed a patent. And do you remember when OnStar came out in GM vehicles? And this was back under the Bush administration. And they went ahead and they put OnStar in GM vehicles. And then what was happening is the FBI had a loophole that the FBI would just randomly turn on OnStar and listen to people's conversations. And, of course, people are like, well, you can't do that. And the FBI is like, there's no statute that says we can't, so we will. And then George W. Bush was like, no, you can't. And he closed the loophole, allegedly. Okay, he directed Congress to close the loophole. We ended up finding out that actually, with a warrant now, they can turn on OnStar devices and listen to your vehicle, remotely shut your vehicle off, and that sort of thing. But Ford has now filed a patent that is supposed to provide what the car manufacturer calls in-vehicle advertising. The solution is to eavesdrop on what's being said in the vehicle, correlate that with location and other data, and then serve up some bespoke ads to you. Remember Minority Report when you walked around and you had all those holographic ads that were specifically for you? Remember that? The patent reveals systems and methods that would achieve the goal of targeting ads to car occupants using their conversations. I'm in trouble.
I was just going to say, we would be so cooked. We'd be so cooked.
Yeah. That's... What does it register if you have kids in the car too? Because, what if you're having a very different conversation without the kids there? Then the kids are in there, and then it's serving up some spicy ads to you that probably should not be heard by the kidlets. I mean, your phone and your Amazon Alexa, they do all of this. It's like everything listens to you now. So now Ford's just like, well, we're going to do it too. We're just going to serve up ads in the car. At least with your phone, it's like a visual medium, right? You can hide that from your kiddos, but how do you hide something coming through the intercom speaker or something like that? Dad, what is Glitter Gulch? Ah! I'm trying to imagine how south this could really go. There's gotta be lawsuits for this. There has to be. Cars have long since become yet another commonplace where people's privacy is being slowly eroded, but some observers are now worried that the latest idea out of Ford may be crossing the line. Ya think? Whether or not Ford's patent, which makes intrusive advertising practices to another level, would face any type of backlash from buyers of their machines remains to be seen. But even some advertising professionals are worried that things may be getting out of hand at this point. Yeah, I'm sure that some are worried about it. The guy who created the pop-up ad apologized to the world several years ago. Remember that? The guy who invented it is like, I'm so sorry I did this to all of you. What makes this scenario significantly different from users acquiescing to having their personal data hoovered by a large online platform and enduring, even when targeted, ads in order to use those platforms for free, is that they have already paid for their car. And that's the other thing. You know, the idea is when you're using, even though you pay for your phone, right? Google still does it, Apple still does it, but generally speaking, social media, you're giving them your information for free because they're lending you their services for free. There's an exchange there. Whereas you bought the dang car and the car is yours and the car is yet spying on you. Now they're expected to subject themselves to a new level of surveillance and keep paying, and with some very dear currency, namely extensive information about their communications, their location, their directions, and their intentions. How is this? Think of the database that could happen with the things that you say in road rage. Just with road rage.
I'd be in jail immediately.
I mean, I had like a minor incident the other day, and Harper was like, Dad, chill. I was like, okay, sorry. I've been pretty good with the kids in the car lately, but Harper was like, calm down. I was like, all right. The patent indicates where the automotive industry would like to be heading, tapping into the vast amounts of money swirling around the murky ad industry while disregarding their customers' basic interests. So you take a look at the patent, and yeah, I mean, it is what it is. It's passive listening to what you're doing in your vehicle, serving up some ads. You know, the other thing too is like the ads are a distraction. They are, and there's a lot of these GPS and map apps and things like that they do the whole, oh, well, you can't do this unless you check that you're the passenger of the vehicle. Meanwhile, they'll throw you an advertisement in the middle of driving down the road where you can't see your map unless you close the advertisement, which causes me to be, you know, finger punching my phone and stuff like that, trying to not get in an accident. So there's already that issue. But this is certainly not going to be well received by a lot of people, but a lot of lemmings will go right along with it and they'll be fine. Just in case it does become a feature in Ford cars, here's what it would take to determine vehicle information, location, speed, drive mode, user data, such as route prediction, destination, etc. The cherry on top is, quote, determining user preferences for advertisements from any one of more audio signals within the vehicle and or historical user data, selecting a number of the advertisements to present to the user during the trip and providing the advertisements to the user during the trip through a human-machine interface of the vehicle. Yeah, not great. Have a great night, folks. See you tomorrow.
Podcasts by Federated Media.